Thanks everyone for joining us today to talk about Oracle licensing and virtualization. I feel sometimes like it's Groundhog Day because I've been talking about this subject now um, at Palisade for about 10 years, and then before that, many years at Oracle. And it's the technology around virtualization is changing heavily, but Oracle's behavior really hasn't changed, where they're using your need to virtualize as a revenue generating opportunity for themselves, but also a way to get you in more embedded in their ecosystem, where their virtualization has an advantage from a licensing perspective or a perceived advantage over others like VMware. And now obviously that everyone's moving into the cloud, this becomes even more important. So today's presentation, we want to, let me go through this, sorry. We want to share with you our insights on what we're seeing in the market. So let me just share this. And as Marissa mentioned, there is Q&A. So if you have a question, please submit it in the chat box, and we will make sure we get to that at the end. We are not going to take the full hour here. I will tell you that today's presentation, you are either going to love it or you're going to hate it. And what I mean by that is it's going to be completely liberating for you, and you're going to fully embrace the power and flexibility that you have to set your own course, or it's going to be crazy frustrating because you'll be like, well, I'm in the same spot I was before. You haven't completely answered all my questions. So you're going to be in one of those two spots, and that's not us, that's Oracle, right? So that's the place. So you will get out of this presentation sort of everything you need to manage your Oracle environment from a virtualized perspective, from a licensing perspective. You might not like the answers, or you might love the answers. I don't know. So anyway, let's get into it. Little brief background for those of you that don't know Palisade Compliance. We've been in business now for about 10 years. I can't believe I'm saying that. We're a group of former Oracle executives, contracts people, auditors. I actually ran Oracle's contracts and business practices and compliance teams for many years while I was there, from 95 until 2011, when I left and started this company. So Palisade is 100% independent of Oracle. We're not an Oracle partner. We're not an Oracle reseller. We're not anti-Oracle. We're not pro-Oracle. We just help our clients make really good decisions about how to manage their Oracle assets, their business assets, their licenses, their cloud, their support agreements, and all of that fun stuff, and keep them in compliance with Oracle. So that's what we do. We've been doing it, like I said, for about 10 years. We've got over 400 customers, from Fortune 10 companies to actually companies that are smaller than us. So the scope of your Oracle challenges may change depending on the size of our clients, but the nature of the problems are always the same. The contracts are the same, the licensing is the same, the deployments are very similar. They just might be larger in some places. So if you want more information, we'll have how to get a hold of us at the end of this. So we want to talk a few things. First of all, what we're not going to do. We're not going to get into a deep discussion of what is virtualization and hard partitioning versus soft partitioning and all the different types of virtualization that's out there. This class, this webinar, sorry, is more for people who know what virtualization is, sort of know Oracle's rules, and are trying to figure out how they manage in those rules. We do have much more detailed information out there, all available for free to walk you through the nitty-gritty of virtualization and partitioning and Oracle's policies and all that stuff. But we do want to talk about, why is this so complicated? You know, like I said before, I've been talking about this for 15 years. Why am I still talking about this, right? I never thought 10 years ago that this would still be an issue today. And why is it so important? It's actually more important now than it's ever been. And then we want to talk about your life in the gray zone and things you can do right now best practices that you can do. I think actually we have more than 3 things on this list now. So that's the agenda for today. Now, before I get started, we do have a poll question. So Marissa, if you can pull up that question. Now you may have to scroll down a little bit. There's 2 questions here. The first question is, what's your current state of virtualization in terms of Oracle? And you can pick all that apply, right? Are you running bare metal? You're running on VMware or using Oracle's virtualization? Are you in the cloud, virtualized or bare metal, what have you? And then are you worried about your position in relation to how Oracle will react to it? And again, you can pick one of those right there. Your responses here will give me a good idea on how to proceed with the rest of this webinar, right? So it's really important that we get some feedback here. Now, as I mentioned, this topic, not only have I been talking about it for so many years, but it's one of the highest clicked items on our website. Whenever we put out new material, people are always asking about it. So I think now is a really good time to talk about this, because Oracle's fiscal year end is about 7 weeks away, 8 weeks away. So I'm sure that there are a lot of you out there having conversations with Oracle right now, and those could involve virtualization and licensing. So Marissa, can you please give us the results? Okay, so first question, most of us are, or the highest percentage, sorry, are using VMware on premise, right? Which again is very common, right? Something we've seen, and you also are using the cloud, right? A little bit bare metal, right? So, and when you're virtualized in the cloud, and we'll talk about this later, there's what your contract says, and there's what Oracle's non-contract documents say, right? So it's really important that you understand those elements. And then here, are you worried? And more than half of you saying, no, we are deployed the way Oracle says we should be deployed according to their non-contractual policy. So we'll talk about that too. And is that a good thing or a bad thing that you're doing that, right? So there's a good aspect to it. And then obviously there's a limiting aspect to it. So we'll talk about that. So that's great that people are, that number is actually a little bit higher than I was expecting. So it's great that y'all are taking that advantage of that and sort of being more proactive instead of waiting for Oracle to tell you, right? You're out there doing it. Okay, so why is this thing so complicated? Well, a few things. First of all, your contracts are very unclear. When we talk about licensing Oracle, 99% of Oracle contracts have nothing in them that talks about how to license in a virtualized environment. Some of you have negotiated agreements with Oracle that put those types of terms and conditions in there. But if I look at Oracle's base agreements, and if I look at Oracle's ULA agreements, those standard documents, there's nothing in there about virtualization. So your contracts are just unclear. Also, the technology is changing pretty quickly, right? VMware 5, VMware 6, VMware 7, VMware X, cloud, bare metal cloud, hypervisor cloud, those things are newer and your contracts might be 20 years old, right? So those are a couple things. Another thing is Oracle has these policy documents. So 2 of them, the partitioning policy document and licensing Oracle in the cloud policy documents. They put them out there and they say right on those documents, this is not part of the contract. This cannot be incorporated into any contract. This is for educational purposes only. And then what do? They try to enforce them, even though those documents say they're not part of the contract. So many people say, oh, well, that's Oracle's policy. I guess I have to listen to it, right? When it clearly states on there that it's not part of the contract. And if we go back to your agreements with Oracle, there's actually language in those documents that says this contract and all of the referenced URLs, everything that's listed in this document is all that applies. Nothing else applies. So on the one hand, you have a contract that says nothing else applies. On the other hand, you have Oracle putting out these policy documents that say they don't apply, but Oracle tries to apply them. I know it sounds crazy, but that is the reality of what Oracle is doing every day. So if you've talked to Oracle about, we're moving to the cloud and is my cloud provider authorized, right? That's the licensing Oracle in the cloud policy or my partitioning policy. Am I allowed to use VMware? Do I have to use OVM? What about IBM LPARs and things like that? So those are all contained there. And it's really up to you, believe it or not, if you want to use them or not, right? Then you have Oracle's support policies. And this is a really interesting one. Now this URL is actually included in your contract. Pretty much all Oracle agreements have a reference in them to Oracle's technical support policies. And those policies do change. But I guess I should have said Oracle support practices is a better term to use here, because a couple of years ago, Oracle's position on using VMware was, we're not going to support you, right? If you have a problem and it's on VMware, we're going to make you recreate that on bare metal. Now, they actually didn't really do that, but that was used as a deterrent to get people to use Oracle virtualization. And I believe it was in the summer of 2019 that Oracle changed that and said, you know what, we are going to support you now. But you know what, they never changed the licensing rules. So what's happening is customers, oh, look, Oracle supports us running our software on VMware or their software on VMware. I'm going to call into Oracle support and log a ticket. Well, guess what? Oracle didn't change their rules on licensing or their non-contract rules. So now they know exactly who's using VMware, right? So it was a brilliant move by Oracle because they were supporting them anyway. It was causing them a lot of grief with their customers in terms of dissatisfied customers, of worry about, are you going to do this or you're not going to do that? And they made them satisfied customers, but now they're more likely, I think, to be giving Oracle information that could lead to negative audit results. The other thing is the law, right? So, we're not attorneys here at Palisade, but we've never found case law that talks about how to license Oracle in a virtualized environment. This has never gone to trial with a verdict, with a judge issuing a ruling on what needs to happen here. So because the contracts are unclear, because the policies change, because technology changes, and because no one's ever really taken this fully to court, and we'll talk about one company that did in a few minutes, that's why it's unclear, right? Because there's no settled law here. There's no settled, it is what we make it. And then the final reason why it's so complicated is really because Oracle wants it complicated, right? When it's complicated and you can't figure it out, that creates doubt, and that gives Oracle sales a wedge to use to extract revenue from you, right? So if you're not sure what the policy is and Oracle says this is how it works, 9 out of 10 people just believe Oracle, right? Oh yeah, that's right, okay, got it, so I'll write the check. So I think Oracle could clarify all this tomorrow if they wanted to, but clearly they don't want to. So it's really, this whole complexity is ultimately because it's in Oracle's best interest. There is nothing preventing Oracle from fixing this. Now, why is this so important? And again, I didn't think 10 years ago I'd still be talking about this, but it's actually more important. And people say, well, everything's moving to the cloud, so all these issues are going to go away, Craig. Well, not really, because guess what? Cloud environments are highly virtualized environments. So this issue of virtualization follows you into the cloud. And as more and more people adopt cloud-based solutions, they are moving to solutions that are, running on these hypervisors. So highly virtualized. So, so that's one reason, right? You're moving to the cloud and it's becoming more relevant to you. The second issue is it can be really expensive, especially as you're moving to the cloud. Oracle's reach is they're trying to reach for more and more licensing, right? So they want, instead of a pie that's this big, they want a pie that's this big in terms of how many licenses you need. And again, we could talk about this forever and how they use these non-contractual findings to put the biggest number on the board in an audit and then have you negotiate down from there, right? So if they can tell you, well, you need to license everything and it's $50 million, but I'll give you a deal for $5 million. You're like, well, how about I give you nothing because I'm not out of compliance, right? That's what you want to be able to tell them. And the other thing is, and this is what we've seen, is really customers are stuck. Many companies are just stuck. They're afraid to move. They're afraid to innovate, at least their Oracle infrastructure, because they don't know. So they are moving tons of things to the cloud, and they're using all that technology that's available to them, and they're reducing their costs and their operating costs, but they have to keep Oracle over here. We're gonna do everything else except for Oracle. So now they've got this shadow group out there who is still has their own IT, and they're unable to move that, or unable to change that, or unable to innovate that. So that's causing people and companies to get stuck. And when you're stuck, if your competitors have figured it out, they're not stuck and they're moving forward and they're gaining market share on you. So we really do see this, clients are coming up to us saying, help us figure out a plan on how to do this. And obviously that's what we do. So that's why it's complicated, and that's why it's important. This is the part that's going to be great or infuriating, and it's life in the gray zone. The reality is it's not clear, like we talked about before. There is no case law. There is no ruling from a judge. There is nothing in your contracts. There are documents out there that change all the time that may or may not apply to you. So the beauty here is that if it's unclear for you, it's unclear for Oracle. And one of the things that Oracle does really well for Oracle is when they're auditing you or when they're just talking to you about licensing, it's what we call a guilty until proven innocent. Prove to me that you only need to do this. Prove to me that you only need to do that. And what we really do, and we'll talk about this in the best practices section in a few minutes, is really flip that around, and really create a system and a process and a methodology for dealing with Oracle, not just for how you implement, but how you deal with Oracle. It's really important to flip that around and say, no, Oracle, tell me where in my contract does it say that? Where in my contract does it say that? Where can you point me over here? Okay, and then really pushing them before we start giving them information. The other thing in the gray zone is if you go to Oracle and ask them what you should do, they are going to tell you what they think you should do. And so if you want to live in that world of what Oracle wants you to do, and Oracle's made up rules and Oracle changing things on you, that's fine. Many companies do that. It's an expensive world to live in, and it's a limiting world. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So I wouldn't ever recommend you go to Oracle and say, Oracle, could you tell me this whole licensing thing? Because I don't know, right? What do you think they're going to tell you? They're going to say, well, you need to buy more licenses, or you need to use more of our stuff, or you need to go to our cloud, right? Of course, if I'm an Oracle sales rep, that's what I'm telling you, right? And I work with those guys for many years. So, believe me, that's exactly what they're doing, especially now, especially in May or April, getting into May. One thing that's not gray in some respect are your contracts, right? There's black and white. Now, they might have missing things like licensing in a virtualized environment. That might be outside the bounds of your agreement. But what is in your agreements are your processor definition. You need to license what's installed and or running. That is very clear. That doesn't change. Your entire agreement clause that says nothing else applies except this document and these URLs, right? That never changes, right? These URLs, the licensing Oracle in the cloud, that changes, right? Oracle says, well, for AWS or Azure, you need, 2 licenses for every one virtual, or you need 1 license for every 1 virtual CPU. They might change it tomorrow, saying you need 10 licenses for every 1 virtual CPU. Are you going to allow Oracle to have that power? Now, we have people who deploy to the cloud all the time, and they show us those documents, those URLs, and we say, well, do you really want to base your whole licensing position on what Oracle thinks today? What if they change it tomorrow? Is that, is that a firm contract? So really looking at this ambiguity in the best possible way and building a reasonable interpretation of your licensing usage is what we always recommend to clients, right? And we'll talk about sort of that risk analysis in a couple seconds here. But really embrace the gray zone, embrace your freedom. It's not the perfect answer, like this is exactly how you do it, but you do have a lot of freedom here, right? And there isn't one way to do it, which is great for you, right? There are multiple ways that you can manage your licensing, stay in compliance with Oracle, and push back on them when they claim that there are challenges or issues to how you're doing it. So one of the things that we always help our clients with is this balancing act, right? Every client is unique and they have a certain profile in terms of how and when they want to spend money and how and when they want to deal with risk. And really understanding where you are in that paradigm on both of those issues, cost and money. Some people say, I want to spend all my money now and I want to have no risk later. Some people say, no, I'm going to spend a little money now and I'm just going to manage my risk throughout. Or some people say, you know what, I'm not going to spend anything now, I'm going to spend it all later. Or here's where I need to sort of have this. And when I say risk, that's just not risk of an Oracle audit. Like I said before, that could be the risk of falling behind my competitors, the risk of not adopting the right technology that I really want to do. One of the things I love when we work with our clients is we ask them from a technology perspective, what do you want to do? Like if we didn't have any of these Oracle issues pop up, what technology would you be deploying? What virtualization would you be deploying? What cloud solution do you want to go to? And once they tell me that, they say, okay, let's work for that, right? That's the answer, is what you want to do, not what Oracle thinks you should be doing. So let's balance our costs and risks based on what you want to do. So specific things that customers do here. When I say adhere to Oracle's position, this is the non-contractual stuff. This is the made up stuff. I call them fake rules, right? These are the fake rules. Some customers, they get audited and they say, well, I'm just going to buy a ULA because it's unlimited. And now I don't have to worry about virtualization because I'll just renew it every 3 years. And we have customers who have ULAs that are 10, 15 years old now because they kept renewing and renewing and renewing, right? So their first one was 10 or 15 years ago. So they do a ULA. Other companies, and I think it was 57% of the respondents on this call said they'll do something like we'll roll out on bare metal or use Oracle's virtualization technology like OVM. And that's fine, right? But if you do that, then you are completely eliminating, VMware, which we don't use it, but everyone who's told me is so much better than OVM or KVM or what Oracle is calling it now. You're also eliminating, those economies of scales. You're eliminating all the great things that happen with virtualization. You're eliminating a lot of cloud providers, right? So, you can do that. Or some people, maybe they rolled out in the cloud, but it's just authorized cloud providers, whatever that means. Because there is a methodology that Oracle has out there on how to count for Azure and AWS, which could change at any moment if you let them. So that's sort of one way, right? So you can spend a lot of money with Oracle now on a ULA, right? And then your risk goes down now, but then what happens when you leave the ULA, right? So your risk goes down, but then it goes back up, right? So the money goes, spend a lot now, and then it comes down. You can go on bare metal, right? And then you're going to have, the costs associated with running Oracle in that type of environment versus a hyperscaled environment. You could use OVM, and then that's free, no financial cost, but there is a technology cost. There's a cost, an innovation cost for using that. So that's what I mean by costs and risks. Other folks fight Oracle's position. You know what? They say, screw it, I'm going to do this, and we'll see what happens. So Mars is a company that we represented, not legally, obviously, but through their Oracle audit. And I talked earlier about there being no case law around this. Mars is really the one company that I know of that actually filed a lawsuit against Oracle for audit practices. And the issues came around virtualization. So good or bad, the Oracle was auditing them. This is all in the public record. You can all go on our website. We've got a link to the opinion or the filing, sorry. Never got to an opinion. And Oracle audited them. Mars gave them tons of information. Oracle threatened to terminate all their licenses. Mars said, no way, we're going to court. We want this issue resolved by a judge. A few days later, the case was withdrawn, right? So that's what I can tell you. I can't tell you anything after that. But needless to say, that one never made it to a jury or a judge for verdict. Now, other companies, like I said, they don't get to the level of Mars in terms of the fight or the publicity of the fight, I should say. But they do go into audit saying, no, that doesn't apply, and this is how I'm going to do it. And if you do that the right way, you're going to end up in a really good spot. If you do that the wrong way, you're going to end up in a really bad spot. So we'll talk about that in a second. And then obviously, what we recommend is you have a more holistic strategy, right? I don't think it's, we're going to do whatever Oracle says. And I don't think it's also screw what Oracle says. We're just going to do this and then we'll deal with it later, right? You just want to deal with it now and figure out a solution. So those are the three ways. And again, all of them have costs and risks associated with them. And it doesn't mean they're high cost, doesn't mean they're low cost. There is a cost to doing this. It could be a financial cost, could be a technology cost, could be a cost for innovation, good or bad, right? Hey, we're going to do this. I'm going to be really innovative, right? Ooh, but that's going to put up our risk of audit. So those are the things that you want to balance. And I know this is not the black and white that everybody wants, but this is the reality of it. So best practices, we've got a couple of slides here that I want to walk through. And the first thing we recommend is always start with your contracts. This is something I've been saying for 10 years now. Let's read your agreements. Now, I mentioned that 99% of Oracle contracts don't have something in about virtualization, but what does your contract say? Does it? Are you part of those 1%? Maybe your ULA has something in there. Oracle has also had many different processor definitions, right? So what does your processor definition say? You want to be really clear. Again, do you have multiple processor definitions? The other thing we recommend is to do it on your own. Be proactive. And when I say on your own, I mean without Oracle. Unless you want Oracle's answer. Never ask a question of Oracle unless you already know the answer and you like the answer, right? So that's a good practice, I think, for a lot of vendors, but particularly with Oracle. So do it on your own. Obviously, we can help you do that. Palisade can help you, but you need to determine what your unique circumstances are, what your risk profile is, how close you want to be aligned to Oracle's, I call them fake rules. There's good and bad about that, and how far you want to deviate from that. So those are all important. If you are using VMware and you do want to deviate, so you're using VMware and you don't have a ULA, then we do recommend there's some things you can do to closely monitor and keep records of where Oracle has moved onto what servers and all that. And we'll talk about that more closely in a second. But these are some examples of taking ownership of this. And I can't list every single scenario that every customer is in because everyone is different, right? But these are the factors and these are the steps that you can take to come up with your position. And next slide. Oh, we missed a slide. Okay. One of the most important things that you can do is how you manage Oracle, right? So there are two sides to this issue of virtualization and licensing. The one side is how you actually manage the technology, what technology you deploy, how you deploy it, and all of that, right? So we're using VMware, we're using the cloud, we're bare metal, however you're doing that. That is sort of one piece of the puzzle. The entire other piece of the puzzle is how you deal with Oracle, right? You want to deal with Oracle in a way that exactly complies with your contracts, right? So we never recommend that people go out of compliance. We never recommend you hide things from Oracle. We never recommend we try to get around the rules, right? We want to live within the rules. Unfortunately, in this case, there almost are no rules, right? Other than your contract says installed and or running, like that's the rules. So unless your contract says something else. So you really want to take ownership of that. For example, you should know that if you're one of those 57% or so that's using VMware, whatever that percentage was, and you're calling in Oracle for support, you are sharing information with them that you're using VMware, so they know. It's okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world. When Oracle knocks on the door, they have these, we just want to talk to you about your licensing, right? That's when they're looking for information that they can use against you. Remember, anything you say to Oracle sales may be held against you later, right? It's not an official Oracle audit, but think of it as a quasi audit. So you want to think about that. So it's fine to have those conversations with Oracle, but those should be really one way, where Oracle says a lot of stuff to you and you listen and say, thank you very much. And we'll take that under advisement and we'll respond accordingly as needed. So, sometimes those are very friendly conversations. Sometimes they're not so friendly conversations, but just going to Oracle saying, well, we did this and we have a high risk profile, so we're okay to put in virtualization and use VMware everywhere because we don't care what you say, it's not in our contract. That's probably not the smartest response, but I have seen it. And sometimes it does work, but not in general. So again, understanding that Oracle's looking for information from you is looking to generate revenue from you. So that's really key here. It's not even what you do, it's how you deal with Oracle. Because the rules are so opaque, how you deal with Oracle part is really important. Now let's think about an audit. If you're audited by Oracle, one of the things that Oracle loves to do is say, give us all this information, fill out this spreadsheet, run these scripts, answer these questions, sit for these interviews. We're going to take all that data and then we're going to give you a report and we're going to tell you what you owe us. That's an interesting way to do an audit, to go into it with not knowing what the rules are. How about this? If Oracle comes knocking with an actual audit, you say, great, thank you, Oracle. I appreciate you helping me with my licensing, right? Because they always say it's help. So thank you, Oracle. Even if you don't mean it, it's okay to be nice. And then going to Oracle, Oracle, could you show me the rules around virtualization? Before I send you anything, show me in my contract where it talks about this. Tell me how this is run. Tell me how that's run. And really getting into a discussion about the rules before you send the data. I mean, if you were going through an audit, a tax audit in the US, it's for the IRS, would you really, if the IRS came to you and say, listen, we're not going to tell you what the rules are. We don't have anything written down. We've got some policies that you can't see, they're internal. But just give us all your records and then we'll tell you if you're cool, right? Would you ever do that? That's exactly how Oracle does audits. So the percentage of customers who actually gets audited from Oracle is probably not as high as you think. So the actual chance of getting audited from Oracle is reduced. And then if you manage your audit correctly, you'll be fine. We've seen many customers go through this. We've helped many customers go through this. And just managing that audit, managing those discussions with Oracle is really key. Again, you always want to be in compliance. You always want to listen to what your contracts say, but you don't have to listen to everything Oracle makes up, right? It's ridiculous. You have any other vendors that you work with like that? Probably not. And obviously you do need some governance here, right? This is not a set it and forget it thing, right? So we've had customers who said, yeah, I deployed this way years ago. I got audited. I changed my deployments. Oracle's come back and nothing's changed, right? I haven't changed a thing. And now they're saying I'm out of compliance again. Yeah, well, some things have changed. You've changed your version of VMware. You've updated your hardware. You've done some things, maybe not overall things to your environment. Your company size is exactly the same. You still have 10 servers, but now they've got triple the cores, right? So really it is something, it's not like every day. I'm not saying go out there and buy these SAM tools and spend millions of dollars to do this. Because a lot of this is risk mitigation and conversational and sort of more sort of executive type discussions and strategy. But it is always good to have data and information to base your decisions on and your approach. So take ownership of this rather than letting Oracle do it, right? So the ultimate answer is, how do you license on a virtualized environment is, how do you want to license on a virtualized environment, right? And let's find that way to do it. So again, I know that could be a very frustrating answer, or it could be a very liberating answer, depending on your point of view. I live in the gray zone, so it's fine with me. Some other clients want much more certainty, and there's always ways to get certainty. Like I said, you can give Oracle lots of money on a ULA. You could use OVM. You can use bare metal so that you can get certainty if you want. If you go down, and the closer you are to Oracle's position, the less chance Oracle will knock on your door. So it's just what's more important, doing what you need to do for your company or avoiding that knock on the door. Okay, so those are our best practices for freedom and responsibility and how to take ownership of it. Obviously, we think we can help you through this. So if you are using virtualization, if you have any questions around Oracle licensing, the column on the left, please call Palisade Compliance. We're happy to help you. Like I said, we've got over 400 customers who do this. We do this for building strategy and defending from Oracle and executing on strategy. And then if you're just looking for more information so you can do it yourself, we do have some free training available on Paliversity. So that's on demand. You just, get an ID, we'll give you one, and you have access to all those classes. And we do have one in here on virtualization. So we update these about every couple of years. So it gets into a lot more detail specifically about the different types of virtualization, how to manage some things. So if you're looking for a little more detailed information, you can get that through Paliversity. If you want specific information as to your environment and your situation, that's where we need Palisade Compliance engagements to come in. So okay, I will leave my presentation on this slide so you can all take down notes. But Marissa, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, so we have one question that came in through the chat. It actually looks like a two-part question. So, do you know if Oracle has already audited public cloud environments like AWS, Azure, and GCP? And then the second part of that is, do they have the tools, including LMS, working on public cloud environment?
Well, I think the public cloud environment, it's a great question. So yes, Oracle audits, wherever you use Oracle, they audit. Not only do they audit in public cloud environments, but they audit on the Oracle cloud. So when you're thinking about going to Oracle cloud, remember that if you're on the public cloud or you're on premise, you have to give Oracle information. So auditing, pick AWS, right? That's a good example because they're quote unquote authorized. So you should know how many licenses you need, although it's still not, that's changed over the years and that number is subject to interpretation. But also you not only need to know how many licenses you need, but what products are you using? So if you you remember the database has all these extra cost options. You could be running in AWS, you have 10 licenses, you're using 10, that's fine, but you've turned on advanced compression. So the same scripts that you would run in your on-premise environment on your database, Oracle would ask that you run in your cloud environment. Now, a challenge comes in often where customers are not only in the cloud, but they've outsourced their environment to some other firm. So now they can't even run the scripts. So Oracle audits you. Now you've got to go to your cloud/provider and your outsourcer, and then they've got to go run those scripts and then hand it back to you, and then you hand it back to Oracle. And then often you've lost control of that whole process. So yes, Oracle audits in the cloud. It's the same methodology that they would use here. The only difference in the cloud is if you are Oracle Cloud, because now they don't really have to ask you permission. They have all your data, and in your cloud services agreement with Oracle, it says very clearly, Oracle can use all your data for license management purposes, which means audits.
Thank you. So we also had some questions in before the webinar. One, what is the advantage of VMware over virtualizing using Oracle's virtual server?
So this, I'm going to repeat what other people have told me. I'm not a technical person. I've never used VMware. I've never used OVM. What I've heard is virtualization using VMware, there's so much more features and functions and capabilities. It just works better than OVM. So that is why companies, again, OVM is free and VMware charges for their product. So the fact that one is free and one is charged and VMware is still the dominant player, I think that tells you a lot. So the advantage from a licensing perspective, again, if you want to adhere to Oracle's non-contract policies, you can use OVM as a hard partitioning mechanism to reduce your licensing needs. From an Oracle perspective, I think you can use VMware as well, but Oracle says you can use it. But there, again, like with everything, there's a caveat. You have to do it a certain way. So just because you're using OVM does not mean that you've limited your licenses. You have to use OVM in the way that Oracle says you need to use it, right? So you need to have capped partitions for that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, are there any tools available to prove that a virtual machine has been correctly set up for a limited number of licenses?
So, and this is what we were talking about before. I don't think there's a tool available. Rather, what I would say is you need to go to your, and if it's VMware, your VMware console, and keep records of, if you're using host affinity and you're pinning databases to certain servers, you need to keep those records for over a year. So I would make sure you've got good records, and there are ways to set up. Again, you can use VMware in a way that still adheres to Oracle's policies if they knock on the door. That might limit a lot of the functionality that you're using VMware for in the first place. The other side to that is if you're in the cloud, right? So if you're in, Google Cloud or an IBM Cloud or something that's, not on that authorized list, whatever authorized means from Oracle, using the reports that are available from those cloud providers, or if you're using a different cloud provider or outsourcer, I don't know every dashboard that's available in every cloud provider, but keeping as many records as possible. Do SAM tools do this? No, because it's not something a tool can do. Yeah, it's not going to go. There's so many different cloud providers. I'm sure there are SAM tools out there for a limited on-prem environment that can give you one view. Most of the SAM tools, especially the ones that are authorized by Oracle or approved by Oracle, they tell you what Oracle wants you to believe, right? And there's a value to that, right? So using XYZ tool, it's going to tell you what Oracle thinks. And there is a real value to that. But that's not what's in your contract, right? So that's not the gray zone, that's Oracle's position. And then that's a starting point for your compliance discussion, is a tool. It's not the end point.
Thank you. And we have one more question. Is there any way to make Oracle database licensing on VMware less crazy expensive?
Absolutely. Like I said, you can manage your deployments in VMware, uh, keeping those records, understanding sort of your position where you're not licensing the entire data center. We've seen many customers do that. That's not what Oracle's going to be their starting position. So if you manage your implementation correctly and you manage your communications to Oracle correctly, remember those are two sides to that coin, two pieces to that puzzle. You can absolutely use VMware or any virtualization technology and not have crazy expensive licensing, not be forced into a ULA. We've seen it many times. We're going through it now with some clients who are being audited. So it does happen. But again, you need to take ownership of that. It's not something, well, there's another way to do it. You can give Oracle lots of money, right? But that's the crazy expensive part that you're trying to avoid. So you can manage the risk, you can manage your deployments, you can keep an eye on it, or you can really just give Oracle a lot of money. Those are the two options really that's going to be. There's no set it and forget it way that's cheap. Unless you roll the dice, do whatever the heck you want and never get audited by Oracle, right? I guess that's another approach that I've seen customers take until they get audited, and then that goes out the window. Any other questions, Marissa?
That's all we had for today. Thank you, Craig.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Marissa. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Again, if you're looking for information, whether it's just strategic advice and guidance, and someone to talk to about your Oracle licensing and to understand much more specifically than I was able to do in this call, we're here to help you. If you just need more information on your own, check out our website, check out our blog. Got lots of material out there. Do a search on VMware. Connect with me on LinkedIn and Palisade. And if you just want to do it on your own, we do have that free service, Paliversity, where we put some material out there that could really help you get going. So again, thank you, everyone. I hope this was helpful to you. I hope more of you are happy with what you heard than are enraged by what you heard and frustrated. But that's life with Oracle. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. Good luck with Oracle's fiscal year, and we will talk to you soon.